Firearm regulations in each state concerning non-firearms. During hunting season, you're allowed to use bows and arrows. Those aren't firearms. Sometimes even blowguns, slingshots, spear, knife. Or just your fists, I guess. Anyway, that's bear hunting season in Canada. You fight them over hockey pucks. So anyway, any firearm that can't use fixed ammunition is the generalized accepted definition for a muzzle loader or primitive weapon. It has to have the components put into it somehow. Sometimes it's from the breech. Sometimes it's from the muzzle. Yeah, you can find cities, states, and counties that say if it uses a primitive method for reloading, that's all it's necessary. Which means if you have a straight pipe break action 12 gauge, you can just load it from components and just shove them in. And legally speaking, that's considered a muzzle loader or primitive weapon or black powder weapon. Some of them don't even require black powder. Some allow you to just put in cartridges and they just don't care. But if you're doing them during hunting season, you have to use a breech plug instead of a breech face. And the breech plug has to have the primer in it. It can be inline or it may not be. It might have to have a requirement of open hammers or whatever. For hunting, you must possess a muzzleloader permit validation as well, and a standard permit for hunting in general, and tags and whatever else is needed. In other cases, you don't need any of these things because it's considered open season 24/7, 365 on pests or other things. Primitive firearms of the type similar to those in common use during the mid-1800s, so 1850 and forward, would be considered the primitive type in most cities, states, and counties. Replicas, reproductions, and reintroductions are allowed. Not breech loading in any way in most areas, or capable of firing any pre-prepared cartridge. Now, that could be a paper or metallic cartridge, or having any of the components that are involved in making the basic functions be bonded together or bonded to themselves. Now, that last one has to do with the propellant. Loose powder is acceptable, but pellet powder or preformed masses may not be. You may not be able to wrap this up in paper to make it faster to load. It might require you use literally old-style methods only. Okay. You may be restricted to one barrel, or you may be encouraged to use much more modern methodology. It depends on where you are. Separate components loaded through the muzzle or discharge end of the barrel, but not the primer, which is one of the components. And if it's a revolver, it has to be done through the front of the cylinder. It cannot be inline plugged and then clamped shut. There are apparently inline muzzleloader, quote-unquote, pistols like I've wanted to design that literally you can, this is the funny thing, is that they'll have big fat primers in the back, and the thing is literally just a 45 caliber chamber that you can stick a, well, it's basically a 410 shotgun pistol, but you can quote-unquote muzzle load it. You have to have a breech block that screws in and can't be removed unless you use tools. That can take up the short height of the shell casing and have the threads in there, and that can actually work. Some people have those. They're called conversion guns. They're acceptable, and basically it makes a permanently mounted shotgun shell out of it, and you can load solids or whatever. It must use the following: wheel lock, match lock, flint lock, or percussion caps, and the ignition must be exposed or visible for two reasons. One, it increases your likelihood of failure, and you are dealing with 1880s and 1850s style conditions while hunting, even if you're using what they would consider at the time a brand new wonderful invention, the cap. It also proves to anybody looking that you're not firing modern ammunition. It's to demonstrate you're literally using a primitive ignition system. See also the fact that, well, we'll get to the caliber limits. When it's cocked and ready to fire, if it's not ready to fire, you can't see anything and you know that it can't be fired. Muzzle loading, shoulder stocked, fired from the shoulder only, rifles and shotgun definition. Open or peep sights only, no more than 2 rifled or smoothbore barrels. At least 18 to 20 inches long, depending on local rules. It may be longer or even shorter than federal requirements. See also the caveat at the end Minimum caliber, not maximum, is .357 or 50 caliber or 61 caliber or 20 gauge. The maximum caliber for a shouldered weapon is 77.5 caliber or 10 gauge, bigger than a 12 gauge. Not as big as the Waptec 9 gauge bore that would let you stick a shotgun shell into the muzzle the wrong way and be stupid, where you use a hunk of pipe. You'd have to use a smaller diameter pipe. See also 80 gauge, no, Schedule 80 3/4 inch pipe. That's the diameter. You'd have to bore it out to be any bigger. And yeah, you could put on the other end of the barrel where you could put the cartridge in and flip them end over end and use the threads where you put in your breech block. You could flip the barrel and use that as a place to put in your shrinky dink, aka your choke. Yes, you could literally make this into not only a double chambered gun, but also using a hunk of pipe, make it into something that will easily, without any restriction on performance, switch back and forth from cartridge 12 gauge shells back and forth to being a muzzle loader that you can street legal carry, half loaded, not half cocked. That's what they say about my love life, but up to. So here we go. Well, what can you shoot out of it, Waptec? Well, I'll just get to the point. Number 4 through number 6 non-toxic bird shot or non-toxic buckshot may be permitted, number 1 grade. Not double aught or whatever, depending. This is to give them a sporting chance and or have a minimum amount for impact for shot. This is for birds, turkey, that sort of crap. They allow you to shoot really small animals with that as well, and also we'll get to the pistol in a minute. A single hard cast lead or lead alloy or lead-free copper slug for slugs. It has to be 130 to 240 grains, and it has to have an expanding point in many areas. It can't be jacketed, but sometimes they allow it. And it has to have a length that is not more than twice as long as its diameter. 2-to-1 ratio bullets max. Propelled by at least 40 to 60 grains of granular, loose, black powder, or its equivalent. No nitrocellulose or nitroglycerin propellant charged components are permitted, but in some cases they are, depending on if the gun can tolerate it. Some states actually outlawed the use of modern propellants or just taking apart a shotgun shell and pouring the stuff in as a way of carrying easy-to-carry, cheap packs because people blew their guns up in their face because they didn't know you can't use modern propellants unless you know exactly what you're doing. These people did not. This is also the reason, one of the many reasons they don't allow cartridges, where you shove the cartridge backwards and have the primer at the bottom, because what they would do is to keep it from having a problem or jam firing, meaning they got the rod through their arm, they would leave the primer pocket open and for putting in a shotgun primer and jam the charge down with paper. And enough friction would happen, or they put it down right after the first shot, that it would set it off in their face. So they made a rule about that. It's not just the cartridge type. It's stupid, people. Muzzle-loading handguns. Depending on the state, specifically New York, it may require a license to carry it because it is concealable. They actually paid attention to the fact that even if it's a muzzleloader, black powder weapon, or a revolver, it should be treated as a pistol. They decided that. Why? Because some idiot robbed a store with a muzzleloader, a chamber loader, revolver, a .45. Actually happened. They don't mention what century. New York is a pretty old city and a pretty old state. That's kind of reaching, but okay, sure. It has to have a rifle barrel. It has to be ATF legal in many states. Other states let you use a smoothbore. There's no advantage to a smoothbore pistol, all right? But what are the caliber limits? Because some of us want to make flare guns and legally be able to make them. Remember, if you can tip the barrel over and unscrew a knob, and here we go. It has to be 7 to 12 inches long, depending on where you are. But that's for hunting rules. So you minimum 7 inches, maximum 12 inches, 5-inch range, would be the best practices mode. All of them say at least, they don't say maximum. So that works out to make a 1-footer. So we go to the next one. Minimum caliber. is 53 caliber for a round ball and 45 for conical bullets. That's minimum. Grain has to be 138 to 210 grains or heavier. The caliber limit is any if it's used as a backup personal protection weapon while carrying a muzzle loading rifle, even if it's broken in half or dismantled and you're out hunting. They don't tell you what the maximum bore diameter is. The max bore for a pistol, basically the joke is it's the you know how the Texas sharpshooter joke goes. This is the Alaskan sharpshooter method. The maximum bore is the same as the shotgun, so you can share the equipment back and forth. So you're allowed to have, again, the minimum is 45 to 53 caliber. So they want you over 50 caliber on the pistol in some areas, but 50 caliber would be, I consider, the minimum. So you're allowed to use a 61 caliber or 20 gauge or a 77.5 caliber 10 gauge slug pistol. And in some states, they require that you carry ammunition for both weapons that are identical so that you will not be tempted to carry more than you can for no good reason. If you're not aware, I just said, you're allowed to make a 10 gauge pistol revolver. If you want to build something crazy like that, you're allowed to do it as long as it has a cylinder with the end stopped completely up, preferably using a small cap, an actual cap and ball type. And you put in 2-to-1 ratio ball, and yes, they allow you to load them as a shotgun, apparently. But that's as a backup or personal protection weapon. But then in some areas, you're allowed to fire that off the hand with a 1-foot barrel only, and fire something bigger than a fucking 12 gauge out of the damn thing if you want to. So yeah, you can have a hand cannon in almost every state for hunting. And the rule is if it's allowed for hunting, most of the time, not always, most of the time it's allowed for you to own at home. And if you use it in a self-defense situation, your rules of not being allowed to do something are waived if it's true self-defense. It has to be self-defense. You can't be wandering around carrying it looking for somebody to fight. But I like that they said for backup or personal protection use for a muzzle-loading rifle season, they don't care about the diameter. You can use 22 muzzle loader or normal cartridges, but it can't be used to dispatch what you shot. You have to use a muzzle loader for everything, for hunting. Sometimes you're allowed and sometimes you're prohibited from the following. To review, smokeless powder. Yes, you can load a muzzle loader with smokeless as long as you design it or buy it able to do it. Shotgun or rifle primers can be used or not used. Pelletized powders, brick powders, bird or buckshot, sabeted or belted bullets, and bonding them into a single cartridge. As long as the primer is outside of the chamber they go in. So you can have the bullet and everything wrapped in a thin layer, very thin layer of paper, pushed in, permanently loaded, and keep the caps out. It's unlawful to transport with a charge in the barrel, but is lawful, including in the 6-shooter or more, if if the ignition system mechanism is disabled or removed by not putting in the primer. So you can load up, the standard is a 50 caliber bullet and a 50 caliber Pyrex thing jammed into a 50 caliber pistol, basically a 410 shotgun at this point, but you can use it for slugs, obviously, in a cylinder, and on the back you just don't put in the primers. You load the primers really quick with a fast and pop them on, slap it in there. And yes, if you have all of that, the cylinder popped out of the mechanism, it's considered unloaded. You can carry it in one pocket and carry the gun in the other, depending on where you are. While hunting, possession with any other modern ammunition, component, or firearm of any kind may be prohibited or subject to laws, etc. Antique firearm does not necessarily mean it's legal in the state you're in or federally. These would be considered antique type, but doing all of these other things may take it out of that realm, and the ATF may require you register it, so may the state. And again, just get a gun permit while you have it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And yes, all of these are legal for you to make, depending on what city and county you are. I'll do a video on my own town because that's when I'm limited for the lookup. And you should do as well.